Let's introduce the use of function. And the function that you're going to learn is random between. And random between basically generate random numbers within a certain range. So we have marks for this student, and I'll work under the assumption that the highest marks that a student can score is 9.8 and the lowest is 3.0. So to key in a function, you must start with an equal sign and then random between, and I'm guided by the hint down here. So as you can see, bottom is a bit black. So it's time for me to write the bottom number, and I said the lowest marks that a student can score is 30. Comma, the highest that a student can score is 9.8. That's the top. If you press enter and autofill, and there are two ways to autofill. Take your cursor to the bottom right corner, drag it down. You'll notice that you will populate that random between function to the rest of the cell. So there's one way of autofilling. Or you can just take your cursor at the same place and then double click. The information will also be populated in the rest of the cell. So drag it down and then across so that we have marks for all the students. And if you are paid attention, so let's create a comparison option. So I want to know or to compare the performance of males and females, or based on gender. And first, I would want to know how many males are there. Also, I want to know how many females are there, and also the average. So I want to know the difference in performance. If you pay attention to my database, you will notice that the numbers that we have generated keeps on changing. And I don't want that to happen, because I want to have values that I'm using for analysis. So how will I solve this issue of my observation from changing? So it's simple. I'll just copy and paste this database in a different worksheet. But this time, we're not going just to paste the normal way, but we'll paste it special as values. So how do you highlight? You can either Control A, so just take your cursor to the first cell, that is cell A1, Control A, depending with the Excel that you're using. So for me, if I Control A, you notice I'm not highlighting the entire. So it depends where the cursor is. If you are here and you say Control A, you notice it selects only the database or the area with my database. But if I want everything, I can just click at the top corner and you realize the entire database have been highlighted, which is a very dangerous way of selecting your data, because you'll notice you have selected even data sets that are down there and you cannot be able to see them. So I always prefer to use the shift down so that I select the data that I want. Just go and click on cell A1, shift down. Okay, this is the third approach to highlighting. Just take your cursor to the first cell, shift down, and then go and highlight up to where you want to pick your data. So select any endpoint. I will copy. You can either use the shortcut just copy. So the shortcut is Control C. You will know that you're copying your data based on these ribbons. So what this indicates is you have some information on the clipboard. I will go to my second worksheet. Right click at the same first cell, that is cell A1. Go to Paste Special, and I'll say Paste as Values. I'll click OK. And now I have a database, and my hope is it will not keep changing. So let me add average here so that I know. So I've just had average, and as you can see, there were no changes in my dataset. So I think I've already solved that. Let me rename this worksheet as data. So just right click, go to rename. Let's call it data. I don't want to have this sheet 2 because I'm already done with it, but you can have it as draft on your end, but I will always prefer to have a clean database. So let's go to other function now that we've introduced the first one, which is random between. To calculate the total marks, we'll use the function sum. And you're doing sum of what? Sum of all the subjects. If you press enter, you'll have George with the marks of 316. Autofill that, and no matter how many students you have in your class, by autofilling, you'll be populating the same function to the rest of the students. Let's do for average. So equal sign average, and then average of what? Average of all the subjects. So, and be careful with the concept of average, because you cannot say average of the total, even though that's what you're doing, but you have to be in communication with your software whereby you're saying, oh, how many subjects were there? So the average marks for George is 63.2. If you autofill, you're getting details for the rest of the student. Let's remove the decimal points. I prefer to work without decimal. So I will highlight my entire average column, then go to the Home tab. On the ribbon, focus more on the number tab. Sorry, on the ribbon, focus on the number section. And we have these two icons here. So if you point at this one without doing anything, it says what? Decreases decimal, while the other one increases decimal. So we want to decrease the number of decimals that are there. And there you go. I'm sorted. Let's jump into count so that we compare the performance between the two groupings. So how would I know the number of males in the database? The function to use here is a function count if. Basically, you're saying count based on a certain condition or criteria that I will set. So if you want to count male, the criteria will be male. Count if someone is a male. Start with an equal sign. Count if. What is the range? Basically, you're saying, where are you doing the counting? So I'm counting items under the column gender, comma. Now, who are we counting, or what is the criteria? The condition is for you to be counted, you must be a male. So male is a string character, or we can call them alphabetic characters. And you have to introduce speech marks for the software to understand that whatever you're dealing with is not numbers, but are alphabets. I will press enter and the software returns that I have 5 males. I will do the same for female, and only this time the criteria is going to change from male to female. So equal sign, count if, range is still the same, comma, and then we are counting female. Let's do for average, and the same case here. We're doing average, but this time average with a condition. So the function is average if. What is the range? I will highlight the entire gender section, comma. What is criteria? For males, I will just enclose in a speech mark and write male, comma, average range. So average of what? I will select all the subjects. I will press enter, and the average for males is at 63.2. I will do the same for females. Equal sign, average if, range is the entire column gender, comma, criteria will be female, comma, average range selects the entire subject. I will reduce the decimal. So I highlight both cells. And from the results, it says what? First, the number of males and females are the same, but we have males having an average of 63, while females 61. So males are doing better than females. Let's talk about grading. But before we go to grade, I want to introduce the part of remarks. Okay. And with remarks, I want to either say I'm promoting a student or a student is going to repeat that class. Now, what is the determining factor for you to be promoted or not? Schools normally set their minimum threshold for you to be promoted. In this case, we can use 40. Therefore, if a student scores less than 40, they repeat that class. If a student scores otherwise, then they are promoted. The function to use there, we will introduce now the aspect of logic and conditional statements. So in this case, I'll say what? If. So the function is if the software wants to know logic, what am I testing? So the logic will be if a student's average is less than 40, comma, what should happen? Value if true. What should the software do? The software should tell me that that student should repeat that class. If your average is less than 40, you repeat the class. Comma, If you're not repeating that class, then you're promoted. I will press enter, and George, who's the first student, is promoted. If I autofill, all my students are promoted. Let me reduce some marks. Let me reduce some marks for the student. And as you can see, one of my students is going to repeat. Let's go now to assigning grades. And we will use the same concept of logic. So this time, I don't want just to say a student is promoted or the student is going to repeat. Instead, I want the software to be assigning the exact grade. And we will start by developing a grading system whereby we say if a student scores less than 40, then the software should award them a grade of E. If a student scores less than 50, then the software should give them a grade of D. If a student scores less than 60, the software should give them a C. If a student scores less than 70, then the software should give them a grade of B. And lastly, if a student is not scoring any of these grades that we have mentioned, then let the student get a grade of A. So we're saying what? We have average. Based on this average, we will identify the grading system. Let's say if your average is less than 40, the grade is E. If it's less than 50, said you'll get a D. Less than 60, C. Less than 70, you get a B. If you have not been captured in all these groupings that are there, then you'll say that that student get an A. So there are two approaches that we'll see to that. So either you can change the inequalities and say, okay, anything greater than 70, give an A. Or the software also understands logic, so it will know, okay, if a student is not getting anything other than E, D, C, and B, then they'll be automatically assigned a grade of A. So let's see how we can implement what we call nested if statement. And we'll start with an equal sign and say if the average is less than 40, comma, value if true, the software should give the student a grade of E, comma, if that's not the case, then introduce another if. But this time you don't have to start with an equal sign. I'll select if. The logic now will be average is less than 50, comma, value if true, the grade is D, comma, introduce another if statement, and the logic will be the average is less than 60, comma, value if true, we give them a C, comma, introduce another if, and the logic will be average is less than 70, and the grade is B. Now, this is where you say you can either introduce the greater than sign, or you can just introduce A and say if a student is not captured in all those grades, then let the software value false return a grade of A. At your own free time, I would want you to use the part of greater than sign, because in this class, I'll not do that. I will press enter, and the software wants to know if I should allow it to assign the parentheses. And of course, that is what I would want. So I'll just say yes. And I have a grade of B for the first student. If I autofill, I have grades for all the students. I hope you're now comfortable with the introduction to functions and how to develop a database. We will meet in our next class, whereby we will continue with the understanding of functions.